We are live.
Hello and welcome once again to another episode of Atomics' Founder Hacks podcast, where we look at something we've seen, something we've read, and something we've learned that's provided us some inspiration, either for ourselves or for the founders that we're supporting in a wide range of different businesses. Of course, I need to say hello and welcome to my illustrious comrades, Mr. Anthony Enright.
Hello, Ben.
And the delightful Mr. Alex Moore.
Oh, delightful today, am I? Thank you. Hello, Ben. How are you?
You're fairly delightful, mostly. We'll see how it goes. We'll check at the end of this podcast. So, guys, we've got a packed agenda today, so let's kick straight off. And I think, Alex, you're going to kick us off today with a story from something you're doing at the moment, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, my scene this week. Been trying to put together a deal involving a number of companies with a total, I sat down and counted that 10 different people are involved. And I think it's quite logical what we're trying to do. The idea is quite there, and put it to every single person. It's very logical for me, but I don't think there's much logic being used in the decision making of all the people. It's far more, and it reminds me of a quote which I'm stealing horribly from Anthony because he's cleverer than I am. That people choose with emotion and justify with logic. And I just really had to chuckle because when I was in the middle of this is such a great deal. Everyone should absolutely love this. That people are coming at it from all different types of angles, which are largely based on emotion. And that's the thing that got me. You know, I just see this as being just something that I needed to accept and then deal with and not be frustrated by. And I thought that was my scene. So when I chucked it out on our Tuesday morning chats, I just chucked it out there because I thought this would be a good one to debate. So I guess the questions to you guys are, number one, do you agree? And then if you do, what have you found in the past to not get frustrated by it and deal with it? So I reckon Anthony, he looks quite keen to answer this one.
Well, you've quoted him, so I think he probably should go first today.
Yes, off you go.
As is always, I would like to take full credit for that quote, but I do think it comes from a particular Mr. Simon Sinek. And for me, it's the realization, when you realize that we all make decisions based on emotion and justify with logic, I think it opens your eyes to how you need to start dealing with people and how you need to get people on board. And not get people on board, but how you can work with individuals to get them on board. And I'm always reminded of my old, I'm still involved in my rugby club, not as much as I was, but I learned it at quite a young age. I was asked to go on the committee because I was always very keen. Loved my rugby, not a great player, but very keen to be involved. So I was always involved in organising things and doing things. And what I learned really quickly was when you went to a committee meeting and you sat down at the committee meeting and you said, I've got this great idea, and you were trying to get people's buy-in, and it would need a vote, right? It's that traditional committee type environment that you need a vote. And in the first few meetings, I wasn't getting my message across. I wasn't succeeding in getting things voted through. And then one of the old guys took me aside and said, okay, you need to learn how these things work, Sonny, right? You have
Love
to...
the word Sonny. Love
yeah,
it.
you have to look at who the key decision makers are. You have to look at who's involved, and you have to take them aside. You have to have one-on conversations. You have to talk to them about what it is you're trying to achieve and why it is. And just tell them the story. And once they connect to that story, once they connect with the why you're looking to do it, actually the committee meeting is just a ratification process. You'll get your buy-in because you've taken the time. Not only have you taken the time, but you've got people to connect with why you're looking to do it. And later on, I now realised it's this, right? It became very successful, right? We did it all the time. It was quite a lot of work, right? It's quite a lot of work. You had to seek people out and, you had to talk to people. This isn't quite before mobile phones, but probably a little bit before mobile phones. You either had to call people at home or arrange to meet up with them, or whatever it may be. So there was a lot of work involved. But it did work. It was powerful because you got the votes. You got what you wanted to get done. You got it achieved, and you were able to go and to deliver whatever it was you were looking to deliver. And it's now fast forward and listening to and reading a lot and listening a lot, and you realise it's this. It's that we all make decisions based on emotion and we justify with logic. And that's what I was doing without realising it. By telling them the story, by telling them what I wanted to achieve, by putting my passion into it, they connected to something within that story. The emotion connected with them. And then sometimes you've got to justify, sometimes you've got to give people the logic so they can do the justification. But actually, you've already won them over. The logic is that experience when you go to the shop or you go online to buy one thing and then all of a sudden you've bought 10 other things as well because something's connected with you. And then you say, at home when all the parcels arrived, oh yeah, well, I do need a new pair of shoes because there's a little bit of a hole there, or I've got a big presentation coming up and I need a new pair of shoes to make me feel good. That's just justifying with logic. Something along the way connected you to the emotion, which is why you made that decision.
Wise words. Ben.
Very good.
What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. And I kind of know the research, right? That it's a statement of fact. And yeah, Simon Sinek, absolutely. All the research says people decide first at an emotional level and then try and find reasons why they're right. So I love where you've taken it, Anthony, into that space, because I can resonate and empathise with it. I guess what's interesting is, perhaps I'm not as emotionally sophisticated as I see Anthony is. I'm more naturally introverted. I tend to keep my feelings to myself. Not that they're not there. They just sit a little bit below the surface for me. So I think again I sort of admire those who have the skill to really recognise that you're connecting with someone at an emotional level can really sway a group and an opinion and how things are moving. And again, it's something I recognise. I'm still learning how to do. I guess the other thing I took from it, actually, interestingly, was perhaps from a different end of the spectrum, which was a level of warning, because what I do see a lot of, and I can think of a number of examples in this past couple of years, I do think it's a bit of a slippery path, because what you can end up doing, of course, is as a founder or someone leading a business is you can get very excited by a shiny thing that you're very emotionally attached to and think it's wonderful. And then if you're not careful, what you'll do is you'll put loads of effort into finding all the reasons why that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Massive confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, we talked about cognitive dissonance, right? Sort of willfully ignore the very, very good reasons why this isn't the right thing at all. So I think that there's two levels to this for me. There's definitely people do just decide with emotion and then look for the logic to justify that emotion, but equally there's that cautionary tale of cognitive bias in there as well. So I don't know, is that helpful, Anthony? Is that useful commentary versus yours? I don't know, but it's definitely something.
Well, I found it can be quite frustrating when people are choosing with emotion, because this is so logical. Why aren't you being? I'm quite black and white in my decision making process, and I'm quite binary. And I was getting a bit. Oh, this is How do you guys deal? How do you not get?
Do you know what? I'm actually I'm happy with emotion, but it's when the emotion becomes ego that I absolutely resonate with that frustration. So I can sometimes completely understand if it's if someone's actually worried about the impact on someone they love or care about, or that level of emotion I have huge time for and empathise with. I think where I do get a bit stuck with this is when actually it's someone's ego that's at stake here and they need flattering to come along on the journey. It's frustrating. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but it is frustrating.
So that's where I come back and say, have they been pre-warned? Have they been forewarned? Do they know what they're getting into? Because generally where ego for me, Ben, comes out is when people feel they need to, puff out the chest and be the one in the room and it's being damaged. Whereas if it's managed beforehand, if you manage that expectation, if you have the discussion, if you understand what's motivating them. And that's why my rugby committee example, I think, is a great one, but it also undercovers the amount of work that goes into this, right?
Yeah,
Alex, you've got 10 people. It doesn't just happen. You don't get 10 people in agreement by just going, yeah, great. Right, 45 minutes in your diary, here's a Zoom call, we're all going to get agreement. That's not how it works, is it?
But the maths are really good.
Yeah.
The way you get that is it takes time, and it takes to bring people in. You've got to understand what's connecting one person to another. And sometimes, a bit like we've talked about before, some people just need to be listened to. They know they're not going to get it past, but they just need to be listened to. So it's creating the right environment for the right people. And I think it takes skill. I think it takes time. And I think, it's a sweet spot for some people and not for others. And I think there's a huge lesson there in that of just about, you're not going to get 10 people to agree. And sorry, Alex, I know you've done a lot more, and I know it's not just one off, but
yeah.
I think if any of us are going into a room and we don't know the people, or we don't know the people as well as we should, and we're looking to get buy-in in a short period of time with a lot of people, that the numbers aren't always going to do it, right? As logical it is to you, we talk about how everybody thinks differently and everybody has a different view, and that's why that needs to be taken into account. If you've got one or two, yeah, sure, you might get it over the line. Or you might recognise who the real decision maker is. Maybe that's what it's more about. Who's the real decision maker? But when you need a majority vote, or you need everybody to agree, that's where it takes a lot more time and a lot more.
Yeah, and I find people just often will follow somebody else. So they make an emotional thing and like, oh yeah, what he said. It's like, wait a minute.
And do you know what? That's I was just about to come onto that and my Burton story, which I bore a lot of people with. So when I was at school, I got 2 weekend jobs and worked different hours and sorts of things. And I worked at Burton's menswear, right?
Styling.
And well, I'm not sure you could call it that, but at Burton's menswear, what you worked out early on is that in order to earn a good wage, it wasn't about the hourly rate. It was about selling the Burton's Group credit cards, right? So if somebody opened up an account and put their purchase on a credit card, they would get 10% off. But we would get £10 in commission, right? And I can't remember, so this is well over 20 years ago, right? So £10 at the time. So, if you did 10 of those on a busy Saturday and just the Sunday opening happened, that was another £100 in your pocket. And what you really realised, so I think where I'm coming sort of full circle with this, Alex, on your point, is that you either get everybody bought in, or you understand in that group of 10 who's the influencer. And who's the influencer? You get the influencers buying, and then everybody follows. And my Burton menswear story is we would deliberately let the queue build up, right? You deliberately let the queue build up, and you might have 5 or 6 people in the queue. And then you'd serve the first person, you'd apologise for keeping the queue going, and then you'd pitch the credit card, knowing that you've got 5 or 6 others in the queue. You knew that if the first person that bought the credit card, the first person that you saw bought the credit card, all the others would buy.
Wow.
All the others would buy, or the vast majority of the others would buy, because they saw somebody gave it credence, somebody connected with it, and it gave credence to everybody else. Alternatively, if that first person didn't buy, forget it. There's nobody in that queue that's going to buy, because the first person didn't buy. Because you're doing it loud enough to hear people, right? You're doing it loud enough so everybody can hear the patter, everybody can hear what's going on, so you can see whether that's a success or not. So, yeah, I think it's fascinating.
Very good. Well, chaps, let's move on, because time is short. And I think, Anthony, you've got a read for us this week.
Well, I have got a read, and it's one about using jargon or acronyms within business. And I think we've all got our own opinions on whether they're good or bad. But certainly the author of this, and obviously we'll share the article, has had a pretty rough time of working with jargon, I think, and working with acronyms, and really detests them. It's like, and feels that you're excluding people, you're not including people by having jargon and by having acronyms. And there's a sort of exclusivity that comes from, do you know what that means? And a kind of, you know, and when you have to ask, what does that mean? That's a bad thing. You have to ask what it means. And I completely disagree with the article, right? Because I like working with businesses that have got acronyms. I like working with businesses that have got jargon. I think you have to be careful how you manage it, but it just means they're personalizing the things that they're doing. And I love the personalization of those particular areas, because they're making it pertinent to them. They're owning it. And I always like the idea of nicknames, or, you know, calling things maybe not quite what they're called, because you just personalize it, you make it your own. So I'm sorry to the author, but I completely disagree. And I think if you're in a room, right, and you don't understand what something means, it's okay to say, I'm sorry, what does that mean? And I appreciate that.
Not many people do it, do they?
Well, I think that comes with a certain amount of confidence, but I think that's where it's at. I think you know, it's that age-old thing of when somebody says, "Oh, you know this person. You've heard of this person, haven't you?" And you go, "Actually, sorry, no, I don't have a clue who you're talking about." So I appreciate it takes a particular type of personality, but I think we should all be, you know, in this new world, we should be. It's all right to say, "I don't know what that is," or "Please, can you explain that to me?" But for me, in reading the article, I just disagree, because I like businesses that take these things, give them acronyms or jargon, and because they personalize it, they make it their own. Mr. Thomas, what was your view on the article?
I don't like jargon. I guess, to be fair, there's a point of intention behind it for me, which is, I've heard jargon used in a way that is deliberately designed to make something more complicated, to put people off, or to make them feel like they're not good enough. And for me, that's almost what I think jargon is when you use it in that way, it becomes jargon and it becomes negative. I see it really differently, and I loved your point, because it's a really good one, about every business, as it goes along, discovers that it needs names for things. It needs to name things, because no one's ever done this before, particularly new small businesses. No one's ever done this before, so we need a name for it. You know, are we going to call it a timesheet? Are we going to call it a checklist? Are we going to, what are we going to call this thing? Are we going to call it Gordon? You know, and actually, those decisions, I think, are profoundly important in shaping a culture. I mean, you guys both know I'm a huge wordsmith, word fan. I love words, and I think they're incredibly important, because every word has an emotional quality. It has a meaning beyond what it might refer to, and I think those choices are incredibly important. And I kind of go, yeah, the dreaded TLA, 3-letter acronym, death by TLA, and perhaps in my days working with a lot of very large corporates, you know, people would talk about death by TLA, because they'd have so many of these acronyms running around the business that it was literally impossible to keep track of them all. But, you know, maybe in there somewhere there's a missed opportunity. Why are we using a TLA when we could come up with a name that actually has some meaning and that people can connect with and help understand? So I guess, yeah, my summary is, I think when jargon is used to make simple things harder, financial services, I'm looking at you, then I'm not a fan. When it is to give people a map to understanding something complex and making it simpler, then absolutely cool. Probably wouldn't call it jargon, but absolutely cool. So yeah, okay. Different view, but related. And
no, I think there are some relations there. But Alex, what were your takeaways from this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of TLAs particularly, but to me, it's rather how they're used and by people in meetings, or, you know, and if it's used to try and pretend that you have some knowledge over somebody else, they annoy me. But if you're in a room of people and they're flying around and everyone knows what everyone's talking about and it's being just used to shorten communication to get things done, then it works for me. I'm more, I find that I get more cross about cliches in business and just these awful kind of things rather than acronyms. So yeah, I don't have such an issue with it. And I guess, each business that I come into contact, they have their own language. Private equity deals. When I was dealing with private equity people for the first time, for a long time, it would just tell me that I'd had all these words to learn, and it was very interesting. Each industry I've connected to, there are words to learn. There's a kind of a language, and again, I don't mind if it's used for brevity or just to simplify communication. I do mind when it's used to try and make people feel inferior. That's my take.
To alienate people within that process, yeah. Yeah. And listening to you both there, it's hard to disagree. I just would come back to the point of going, do you know what? If you don't know, you need to ask. Right? You don't know, you need to ask.
And I love that. And of course, that speaks to the kind of cultures we want to create. And, no such thing as a silly question or a bad question. And I think that perhaps it's a reminder, right? I mean, I had a policy a while ago when we were facing off to a lot of big corporates where we tried to always make sure if we talked about a person, one of our stakeholders, we'd always use their full name. Because otherwise, it just got into this cacophony of Janes and Jacks and Ahmeds, and it was just like, which one? Because we had so many stakeholders we were dealing with. And I think that for me, as long as it's met with things like that, where you also have a bit of control over your communication and make sure that your communication is enriching everyone's experience and helping them understand more, then yeah, I guess I can tolerate the odd TLA here and there.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Alex. We're going to move on now to our learned, and I think it's back to you, Ben, isn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah, this is a bit of a cool one, guys. I mean, I don't know where I picked it up, but this comes from the world of computing and IT, which is where I started my journey,
and where you are now,
again. And where I've come back to full circle with our tip jar business. So this is It's an adage in computing. It's a reality in computing that I think has huge application to how you live your life and how you become productive. And essentially, in computing, multitasking, we all know, is an illusion. So in the world of computing, we talk about multitasking. It's not really true. Computers can't really multitask. What they actually do is time slice. So often when you get below the kind of the features on the box and you look at the technology, what's actually going on is time slicing. So an individual processor isn't doing two things at once. It's just switching between doing two different things very, very quickly. You get less work done than if you were doing one thing by slicing up that time, because there's an overhead. What is real is parallelism. And as the world's become into cloud computing and actually you're computing in lots of different places at once, parallelism is real. You've got more than one processor, so they can both be doing useful work at the same time. But it needs management to achieve that. You can't just set them off. They've got to communicate. You've got to work out how they communicate and set all that up. And I thought this was a rather beautiful metaphor for how we go about our businesses, go about our jobs. Because I think it's true. I think multitasking is an illusion. When I think about the times I think I'm doing two things at once, of course I'm not doing two things at once. What I'm doing is switching very quickly between doing two different things. You can't pay attention to two things at once. It's just physiologically impossible. And you're paying a premium for that. So if you do it, fine, I have to do it sometimes, but I'm always conscious now that, actually I'm not multitasking, I'm time slicing. I'm slicing my time into ever slimmer little divisions and getting less and less done. Equally, parallelism is real. If you have a second or third or fourth or 20 different brains that you're working with, 20 different people in your business, of course you can then get parallel stuff done. You can get more done with more people, but only if you commit to working out how that's going to be organised. How is the communication going to work? Who's going to do what and when? You have to put that infrastructure in place. Otherwise, again, you'll just end up getting less work done. overall. So I just thought it was a pretty little metaphor, taking something out of the world of computing and saying, can this be a little lesson for us? Can this be a little thing we can learn? That actually you don't multitask, you time slice. And if you're going to try and work in parallel, you've got to put in the work to make it work first. So I submit to your intellects, guys. Who'd like to? Anthony, go on, jump in.
So if you're listening to this and thinking, no, I can don't call it time slicing, Ben. It's multitasking and I can do it. You can't do it, right? You can't do it. Time slicing, multitasking, you can do it, but it's ineffective. It's ineffective, in my view. And I tell you what I've seen over the last few weeks of lockdown is people working ridiculous hours. For those that are fortunate enough to be working, they are working ridiculous hours. And they are working longer and longer hours than they've ever worked before. The laptop's on at 7 a.m, it's on at 9 or 10 or night, especially those that don't have a dedicated space that they can work in, where they might be working at the kitchen table or in the sitting room or wherever it may be. And ultimately, if you continue to time slice, which is what it is, right? But we know it as, it's generally called multitasking, you will be less productive. You will be less productive. And I spend a lot of my time over recent weeks banging the drum over productivity. If you want to get a job done, you've got to shut everything else off. You've got to turn your phone off. You've got to turn off any distraction, because we're built for distraction, right? As human beings, we're built for distraction. We're not built for multitasking, time slicing. So if you've got to get something done, because people are stressed because they're not getting stuff done, shut everything else off. You've got to be strict. Shut everything else off. Decide what the most important thing you've got to get done, or the 3 most important things that day. Switch everything else off. Switch off Slack, switch off your phone, whatever messenger tool, whatever email, and get the task done. That's how you're going to be productive. That's how we get productivity. And I absolutely agree with parallelism. I think it takes a lot of process, a lot of procedure when you're dealing with brains. I think it's far easier with machines, but it can be done. Of course it can be done, but you've got to understand there's no silver bullet here. If you want to get things done, don't be distracted. Don't try and do 2 things at once. It will take you way longer than it would do if you just did one task followed by the second task. You'll get both tasks completed so much quicker if you treat them in their one by one.
I love it. I love it. I mean, there is actually another word from computing, which I will bring Alex in. But when you are time slicing, what you're also having to do is lots of context switching. You have to switch contexts. And actually, there's a lot of research that says that is actually a stressor. So every time we have to switch context, that's like another layer of stress for us. So if you're trying to time slice and you're doing all these contexts, but your stress is just going up and up and up.
I'm sure, Ben, promise Alex, we'll let you in a minute, but I'm sure there are studies out there as well that says when you're doing this, you are killing brain cells. Right?
It's very difficult. Very difficult. Alex, what do you reckon?
No, I'm with you. I mean, I was a big fan of the book The One Thing, which I read a few years back, and it does talk about that then. So computers can't... Nobody's good at multitasking. Even computers can't multitask. It's quite interesting. You're getting into more of it. So yeah, I guess it was a question about parallelism and saying multiple processes can help the computer. So we're talking about parallelism. You hire lots of people to help you who are all focused. Is that what you're saying, Ben?
Yeah. Well, I think where I took a springboard off the metaphor was that if you've got lots of processors, they can do more work than one process, but only if you put the work in to organize. And I think that's a place where I've seen a number of founders come unstuck, is they just throw people at a problem. And you go, well, that's fine, but you can't just hire them and just expect them to do. You actually need to put that structure in place to work out how you will work together and how you work it out. And that's true, I think, at both an emotional and a practical level. How does it feel? And equally, who does what, when, and why, and how do I let people know? And having those systems in place to support it. And I think I have seen situations where, founders with perhaps very fast growth businesses neglect to put that structure in place. They just hire lots of people. And of course, what happens? There's no more productivity. No more productivity at all, because all you're doing is getting lots of people in who are just confused. And so I think that's what I took from it.
Yeah, and creating more noise. I find if you've got this, if you hire the extra people and then they're constantly buzzing you all the time, then that's as distracting as multitasking. So yeah, I'm a big fan of focus, doing things in order, doing one thing at a time, and the noise, the static of and the clutter of life, of being bombarded by messages, bombarded by your computer. I turn off everything on my computer. So when an email comes in, there's no beep, there's nothing. There's when my phone's off and off, or on do not disturb mode. I block time when I do things, and when I feel I do believe about that stress thing. I feel calmer when I do that, and I'm more productive. And when I get to the end of the day, I feel more fulfilled. So yeah, huge fan of this computer speak nerd stuff, Ben.
I know you are, which is why I chose to share it with you. Guys, I think we're about at time. Any closing thoughts? Anthony, any final thoughts for today?
Just I like to get on my soapbox, and I like to get on my soapbox, and I like to talk about such things as multitasking, time slicing, and being productive. But Alex's parting sort of comment there about just seen it time and time again. Just work out what the top thing is you've got to get that done that day. Do it first. You'll feel so much better. Right, we live in a really stressful environment at the moment. Get the stuff done that's really the monkey on your back, and the book Eat the Frog, the thing that's really, really bothering you, get it done first. Get it done. You'll feel so much better, less stress. You'll feel like you're actually achieving something. Get it done, or the top 2 or 3 things, get them done. Honestly, it will set you free.
Very good. Very good. Anything to add, Mr. Moore?
Not really. Frogs. How do I end with a frog? I don't know. Quite like my wife likes eating them a lot, actually. But no.
I hear
anyway,
so. They're very tasty.
Yeah.
Very good.
Good chat. No, lots to think about. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I guess all I can say is if you've got something bleeding edge, run it up the flagpole, see who sleuts. Don't slice your time. Process it in parallel. And manage the emotion along the way. So, gentlemen, thank you. Another fascinating conversation. Remains to say a warm thank you and goodbye to Mr. Anthony Enright.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Alex.
And to Alex Moore.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thanks for listening.
I've been Ben Thomas. This has been Founder Hacks, and thank you very much indeed for listening.